63번지 뉴욕. 미치미치의 메모. 도로를 따라 걸으면 도시가 보이기 시작한다. 평소에는 의식하기 힘들지만 현실을 구성하는 선들을 어렴풋이 느낄 수 있는, 서로를 연결하는 섬뜩한 동질성이 유령처럼 떠도는 공간. 이를 초간접적인 세계라 부르자. 흔히 4차원이라고 말하는 분할된 우주. 경험이 의미로 환원되지 않고 위치를 설정할 때마다 사이 공간으로 미끄러지는 삶. 안 그래도 허리 디스크가 작년에 와서 그것 때문에 좀 고생을 많이 했고, 지금은 조금 많이 나아졌어요. 그 모션 데스크라는 책상이 있는데 다들 아시는지 모르겠어요. 버튼 누르면 자동으로 이렇게 올라가는 그런 책상을 요즘 팔더라고요. 그래서 거금을 써서 모션 데스크도 사고, 그리고 이제 저는 사실은 평생 운동을 거의 안 하던 사람인데 운동을 하고 있습니다. 근데 계속 시작만 하고 있어요. 왜냐하면 지속을 못하기 때문에. 모든 것은 영원했다의 여러 가지 주제가 있는데, 여기서 그 좀 흥미로운 점 중에 하나가 이 정 웰링턴이라는 인물이 가지고 있는 정체성인 것 같아요. 한국에서 이제 독립운동을 했었던 독립운동 집안의 자식이지만 미국에서 태어난 미국인이었었고, 근데 미국인인데 또 본인의 어떤 정치적 믿음은 공산주의, 사회와 여러 가지 정치적인 요소들 때문에 이 사람을 괴롭혔던 이데올로기들이 존재를 했었는데, 그러한 교차들이 우리들에게, 지금 시대를 사는 우리에게 되게 많은 것들을 던져준다고 생각을 하거든요. 지금 저희는 굉장히 자유로운 시대인 것 같고, 또 그 어느 때보다 차별이나 혐오 같은 문제가 대두되기도 하고 있잖아요. 많이 마주치는 만큼 분명히 우리 안에 있는 편견이나 고정관념들이 작동할 수밖에 없는 거죠. 근데 20세기에 이미 그런 삶을 살았던 정 웰링턴을 보면서 지금 시대에 대한 어떤 여러 가지 우리가 반성해야 될 것들을 사유할 수 있지 않나, 그런 생각을 합니다. 제가 소설에만 국한되지 않고 여러 작업을 하고, 그리고 그런 여러 작업들이 저에게 또 즐거움도 되고 영감을 주기도 하거든요. 그래서 지금 제가 앞두고 있는 책 중에 하나가 금정현이라는 그 평론가가 있는데, 그분하고 같이 영화에 관한 책을 썼어요. 그 영화에 관한 책은 한국영상자료원 홈페이지에서 연재를 했었던 칼럼을 모은 책이고, 영화에 대한 책이지만 사실상은 영화에 대한 책은 아닌, 그럼 무엇에 대한 책인가 하면 무의미한 것에 대해서 되게 박식하게 이야기를 하고 있는 책이라고도 할 수 있을 것 같습니다. 결국은 그 말인즉슨 다시 거꾸로 말하면 무의미한 것은 사실 없다는 얘기인 것 같아요. 그래서 아무튼 그런 여러 가지 다양한 작업들 공부를 하고 있습니다.
In our headlines on this Monday, June 16th, here in South Korea. President Lee Jae-myung is poised to take part in the Group of Seven summit over in Canada this week to address a host of issues including artificial intelligence and clean energy. And an advisory committee has been set up to chart the policy blueprint of the Lee Jae-myung administration over its 5-year term, and members of the body held their first meeting today. Meanwhile, over in the Middle East, Israel and Iran continue to trade fierce fire over Tehran's nuclear weapons ambitions that Israeli authorities assert threaten their security and stability. We start here on the local front as President Lee Jae-myung is headed to Canada to take part in this year's Group of Seven summit. Our top office correspondent Song Yoo-jin covers his agenda.
South Korea's new leader, President Lee Jae-myung, is making his diplomatic debut on the global stage. President Lee begins his 3-day trip to Canada on Monday to attend the Group of Seven summit less than 2 weeks after taking office. First Lady Kim Hae-kyung is accompanying him and will participate in official programs arranged by the host nation.
President Lee will build rapport with world leaders and lay the groundwork for tangible progress on key issues, including trade. In particular, by highlighting the strength of Koreans who overcame martial law and insurrection, and the resilience of our democracy, we expect this summit to elevate South Korea's standing on the global stage.
The president's first stop is Calgary, where he is expected to hold bilateral talks with leaders of non-G7 countries who were invited to the summit along with South Korea. Those invited countries include Australia, Brazil, India, Mexico, South Africa, and Ukraine. The following day, on Tuesday local time, he will participate in the G7 expanded session in Kananaskis, where the focus will be on energy security. Lee is expected to speak twice, laying out Korea's vision for diversifying global energy supply chains and promoting AI-integrated energy innovation. Bilateral meetings are also being arranged with G7 members. Attention is on whether Lee will hold talks with U.S. President Donald Trump and Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba at a time when the July deadline for the Trump administration's reciprocal tariffs is approaching, while Seoul and Tokyo mark 60 years of normalized diplomatic ties this Sunday.
Through bilateral talks, we'll have an opportunity to strengthen friendly cooperation with major countries in terms of our national interest and pragmatic diplomacy. We will also make progress in discussing pending issues such as trade.
This year's G7 summit, marking its 50th anniversary, will take place on Monday and Tuesday in Canada. President Lee is expected to conclude his schedule and return to South Korea late on Wednesday. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
A presidential advisory body has been set up to lay the groundwork for the new administration's broad agenda over its 5-year term. Our political correspondent Moon Hae-ryun has details.
A new presidential committee has been launched to chart the policy direction and initiatives of the Lee Jae-myung administration over its 5-year term. Dubbed the State Affairs Planning Committee, the 55-member body held its first session on Monday, where its chairperson Lee Han-ju spoke of the committee's goals.
We'll need to recalculate the financial plans for our pledges, determine their priorities, organize the necessary legislative measures, and draft a 5-year roadmap for their implementation.
Aside from setting policy priorities, a key mission for this committee within its 60-day mandate is to propose a plan for government restructuring, making it more efficient and responsive. The chairperson stressed the need for decentralization of authority, administrative efficiency to support South Korea in becoming a global leader in artificial intelligence, and institutional reform to better address the climate crisis. He also called for comprehensive reforms in areas such as long-term tax and fiscal policy. While short-term priorities will be implemented swiftly, he added, long-term goals like climate action will be pursued through detailed annual plans. The committee, effectively serving as a transitional body, was formed as President Lee assumed office without a formal transition process. Special task forces will address balanced regional development, government restructuring and tax reform, while 7 subcommittees will oversee policy planning in areas such as the economy, social affairs, governance and foreign affairs. In the coming days, the committee will receive policy briefings from each ministry as the first step in assessing the current situation. A final report summarizing the committee's work is to be published within 30 days of the end of its mandate. The committee also plans to establish additional channels for public engagement, aiming to incorporate citizen input and broaden participation in shaping national policy. 문혜련, Arirang News.
In other news, the Unification Ministry is looking to discourage the floating of leaflets into North Korea in line with the safety concerns raised by the president. Kim Jong-sil explains.
Seoul's Ministry of Unification says it is now coordinating with other government agencies to curb cross-border leaflet launches. The move follows President Lee Jae-myung's directive over the weekend to prepare a coordinated response, citing safety concerns for residents near the border.
At today's meeting, we plan to discuss a comprehensive government response to the leaflet launches, including both preventative measures and post-incident penalties as directed by the president.
Since South Korea's constitutional court struck down the leaflet ban in 2023, citing freedom of speech, leaflet launches have continued in a legal gray zone. Launches have come from a number of activist groups, including defector-led organizations, and more recently, families of South Korean abductees. The government, seeking to curb the launches, says existing aviation and safety laws can already be used to regulate the activity and that new enforcement guidelines may follow. Asked if that would violate the 2023 court ruling, the Unification Ministry said it would not.
We believe that requesting a stop to the leaflet campaigns, considering the situation on the Korean peninsula and the safety of the public, does not violate the Constitutional Court's decision.
The announcement came the same day families of abductees made a renewed public plea.
We're not asking for their return. We just want to know if they're alive. If the president would meet with and offer comfort to the two mothers featured on these leaflets, I will stop sending them.
The Unification Ministry says abductee issues were previously raised with the North during more than 10 rounds of Red Cross talks. With inter-Korean dialogue stalled, the ministry says it's keeping close contact with families and remains committed to listening. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
The People Power Party elected third-term lawmaker Song Eun-seok as its new floor leader today. Song's priority as floor leader is to address calls for party reform and to resolve internal conflicts amid the impeachment of the former president. Song announced change and renewal are necessary and that a return to the past is fundamentally wrong. Meanwhile, floor leader of the Democratic Party, Kim Byung-gi, was at the Seoul National Cemetery to pay his respects before presiding over his first Supreme Council meeting. Kim then sat down with National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik. In the Middle East, Israel and Iran continue to trade fierce fire over Tehran's nuclear weapons ambitions that Israeli authorities assert threaten their security. Our Iuni has the latest.
Israel and Iran continue to exchange missile strikes as the conflict between the two countries enters its fourth day. Overnight Monday, Israel carried out renewed airstrikes targeting surface-to-surface missile sites in western and central Iran. Multiple large explosions, including at a foreign ministry building, rocked Tehran, with energy infrastructure also hit. Iran launched a new wave of missiles and drones at Israel late on Sunday. The operation involved hundreds of ballistic missiles aimed at homes and infrastructure, Iran's semi-state Mehr News reported. Iran's national news agency confirmed the death of the intelligence chief of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and 2 other generals in Israeli attacks on Sunday. Tehran's health ministry on the same day said the death toll in Iran has surpassed 200. It also said over 1,000 people had been hospitalized. Authorities in Israel say at least 14 people have been killed since the strikes began. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told Fox News on Sunday that the goal is to eliminate Iran's nuclear and missile threats. He also said that while not the main objective, the attacks could lead to regime change in Iran.
Could certainly be the result because the Iran regime is very weak. I think it's basically left with 2 things. It's plans to have atomic bombs and ballistic missiles. That's basically what Iran has. They certainly don't have the people 80% of the people would throw these theological thugs out.
During a cabinet meeting also on Sunday, Iran's president warned that his country's response would become more severe if Israeli attacks escalate.
We will give a powerful response to any aggression they may commit.
U.S. President Donald Trump shared his feelings while speaking to reporters, saying it's time for a deal and we'll see what happens, but sometimes they have to fight it out. Meanwhile, U.S. oil prices rose by around 3% on Sunday after Israeli strikes hit oil and gas facilities in Iran. 이은희, Arirang News.
And in light of the military confrontation between Israel and Iran, the government here is urging its people to cancel or postpone travel to the two places. In fact, over the weekend, Korean authorities raised their travel alert for both Israel and Iran to special travel advisory. Also, this past Sunday, the Foreign Ministry hosted a video conference, that is, to check on safety protocols for Koreans residing in the region. Also, the Director General for Overseas Koreans called on Koreans in Iran to closely heed the guidance of the embassy there. There have been no reports of Korean casualties in the violence-affected areas thus far. Here in capital Seoul on this Monday, the Japanese embassy is hosting a reception today to celebrate 60 years of diplomatic relations between South Korea and Japan. Now, President Lee Jae-myung is not expected to attend the event as he is on his way to Canada today for the Group of Seven summit. Meanwhile, over in Tokyo, the Korean embassy there will host a similar reception on Thursday. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is expected to partake in the event. During the 50th anniversary of diplomatic ties back in the year 2015, President Park Geun-hye and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe attended the receptions hosted by their respective embassies. Up next, in this week's installment of stories to celebrate 60 years of Seoul-Tokyo ties, my colleague An Sung-jin touches upon the growing presence of Korean flavors in neighboring Japan, as many claim the best way to a person's heart is through the stomach.
Where tradition meets taste. From the vibrant colors of 구절판 to heartwarming soul foods such as 된장찌개, the table is filled with Korean flavors. And alongside are similar Japanese dishes. The two countries, Korea and Japan, have come together through nothing more than food. Yoon Mi-wol and Masayasu Yoshihara, two renowned chefs in the Ginza area of Tokyo, have come together to explore collaboration within the realm of cuisine.
So what we're seeing here is a merge of two cultures, Korean and Japanese, coming together through cuisine. Now, if we take a closer look at what the two chefs are doing, Chef Yoon Mi-wol here is making 된장찌개, while Chef Yoshihara is making miso soup. Both use the same ingredient of soybean paste, but with their own cultural twist.
Whether it be the Korean pancake like pajeon and Japanese okonomiyaki, to Korea's mugwort pomuri and sujongwa desserts, and Japan's kuzukiri, the two East Asian countries find cultural crossovers with their fundamental dishes. To celebrate the 60th anniversary of the normalization of Korea-Japan relations, the two chefs have prepared dishes that shed light not only by their uniqueness, but also by their similarities.
Over the decades, I've seen how Korean and Japanese food share common foundations. While the colors and ingredients might differ, the base is often the same. Among other countries, Japan is where Korean food finds the most resonance.
It's been a long time since Korean food entered the country, and in the swarm of Korean barbecue joints and snack bistros, Chef Yoon has worked hard on rooting Korean food in Japan to show what traditional dishes look like.
I've really worked hard on sharing Korean food in Japan. It's not about saying my food is good. It's about showing that Korean cuisine stands on its own. Though we still have some way to go, I feel like at least 60% of it has now taken root here.
And for Yoshihara, he says that it was a chance to get to know more about Korean food.
I know Japanese food very well, but Korean cuisine was new to me. Thanks to Chef Yoon, I've learned a lot while preparing these dishes. For Japanese people, it's easier to explore the flavors with more Korean restaurants opening.
With Korean food offering a wide range of dishes, it isn't only about spreading awareness of traditions. Over time, it has gone through localization efforts as well. Chef Kang takes a creative approach to his Korean restaurant in the town of Nishiogi-kubo. In a country known for its subtle flavors and minimalism, he served dishes based on seasonal ingredients and tries to differentiate them from the cliché snacks of K-Town.
I present unfamiliar Korean cuisine in a way that feels familiar to Japanese diners. The biggest similarity between the two is that since the seasons are similar, dishes can also resemble each other. A lot of people come here with an initial interest in Korean culture.
And Kang's decades-long efforts have appealed to his customers and regulars.
When thinking about Korean food, I usually imagine bulgogi or yakiniku. It's my first time here, but it felt very new and refreshing. I was glad to try this.
The spicy and strong flavored food in Shin Okubo was all I thought of as Korean food. But here, I liked how it was different with their smaller dishes and formality.
Whether it comes from the exposure to content or the flavorful dishes, Korean cuisine is evolving within Japan's culinary landscape. Korea and Japan already share much history and many cultural elements, and cuisine is not only a testament to this cultural intersection, it also reflects both tradition and adaptation. An Sung-jin, Arirang News, Tokyo.
South Korea hosts a total of 76 national heritage sites, and one Turkish traveler has become the first foreigner to visit all of them over a span of 2 months. Our Park Hyo-bin has her story.
While most Koreans have barely scratched the surface of the country's rich heritage, one foreign traveler has gone the distance, visiting all 76 cultural treasures from Ganghwa Dolmen sites to the Museongsawan Confucian Academy in Cheonggup City. Aisha, a Korean language teacher from Turkey, began her journey in April at Suwon Hwasong Fortress and wrapped it up in just 2 months. When asked to name her favorite site, she said it was impossible to choose just one.
I think you really have to break it down into categories. If we're talking about the most photogenic place, definitely Pocheon Art Valley. But if I had to pick somewhere that felt both very Korean and somehow exotic, I'd say Naksansa Temple. And when I went to Hwahue Village in Andong, I was honestly speechless.
She also said the driving force to visit all the key Korean heritage sites was the stamps. The stamp is at the heart of the Korean Heritage Passport Tour, where participants receive a special passport and collect stamps at 76 designated sites across 10 themed routes.
My husband first told me about the program, but the moment I got my very first stamp, I was like, wow, this feels amazing. There was this powerful sense of achievement that made me want to keep going. And I guess another reason was, I wanted to be the Turkish person who knows Korea best.
The Korean Heritage Passport Tour is part of the Visit Korean Heritage campaign, launched in 2020 by the Korea Heritage Agency and Korea Heritage Service. It is an immersive program designed to promote the beauty and value of Korea's national heritage. Since its official launch in May 2023, nearly 400 people have completed the full tour so far.
We deliberately included lesser-known sites outside the Seoul metropolitan area. Since last year, interest has remained strong. So far, we've received around 260,000 applications, and we expect the number to hit 400,000 by the end of this year.
As for Aisha, her Korean journey is far from over. In fact, it's only just begun.
I'll travel Korea until the day I die, seriously. I'll keep going until there's not a single step in Korea I haven't walked. Right now, I'm planning to visit all the cities I haven't been to yet, or the ones I passed through too quickly. That's my goal for the next year.
But it continues with a deep love for Korea. One step, one city, one story at a time. Park Hyo-bin, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. Russia has confirmed a major strike in Ukraine targeting a key oil refinery. At the same time, it says Ukrainian drones attacked its drone production facility. Russian Defense Ministry officials reported that a coordinated air and sea missile strike hit an oil refinery in Ukraine's Poltava region overnight on Sunday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the strike as an assault on Ukraine's energy infrastructure and said it was conducted after the Americans asked us not to strike at Russian energy facilities. In a separate incident on the same day, Moscow reported that Ukrainian drones struck a drone factory near Yelabuga in Tatarstan, causing a fire and killing at least one person. Russian air defenses said they intercepted 6 Ukrainian drones. The details of the strike on the drone factory were confirmed by Ukraine. With a massive manhunt underway in the U.S. state of Minnesota after the shootings of Democratic state lawmakers, authorities on Sunday found the car used by the suspect, who allegedly posed as a police officer while committing the crime. Authorities say a 57-year-old suspect identified as Vance Luther Bolter, disguised in a police-style uniform and latex mask, carried out coordinated shootings at 2 locations in the Minneapolis suburbs in the early hours of Saturday morning. State Senator John Hoffman and his wife in Champlin were shot and critically wounded first, before former House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband were killed at their home in Brooklyn Park. Officers confronted the suspect at Hortman's residence, but Bolter escaped on foot. His car was recovered along with a hit list, which included the names of around 70 Democratic politicians. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz called the shooting a politically motivated assassination, and the FBI issued a $50,000 reward for information leading to the suspect's capture. In India, at least 4 people were killed and more than 30 others injured on Sunday after a bridge collapsed at a popular tourist location. According to reports, at least 20 people fell into the water when the bridge over the Indriani River in Kundamela, Pune, collapsed due to heavy monsoon rain. Search and rescue efforts are ongoing for those who remain unaccounted for. Despite being flagged as structurally unsound, enforcement lapses allowed visitors as well as bicycles to continue using the footbridge. Authorities warn the death toll could rise as rescue operations continue. Bolivia's city of La Paz celebrated its annual Grand Poder, or the Great Power Festival, over the weekend, blending traditional Catholic devotion with indigenous Andean culture. The streets were filled with vibrant dances, prayers, and music dedicated to a 17th century painting of Jesus Christ. While the Day of the Great Power is typically exuberant, the event was more subdued this year, with a moment of silence for 6 people killed in clashes between protesters and police following the disqualification of a former president. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
For a few days, heavy rain has been falling across the country, mainly on the south and Jeju Island. Even though most of the rain had already stopped earlier this afternoon, rain keeps falling in parts of Gangwon-do province until tonight. Showers are forecast for the inland areas tomorrow. There will be at least 5 millimeters to as much as 30 millimeters in Gangwon-do province and the southern regions. Yesterday, the first heat wave warning was issued in the Seoul metropolitan area this year. For the time being, daytime temperatures will rise to around 30 degrees Celsius in inland areas. Please take care not to get any heat-related illnesses in this hot weather. Tomorrow morning will start warm at around 19 to 23 degrees all over the country. Highs will move up to 30 degrees in Seoul, 31 degrees in Gwangju, Daegu, and Gyeongju. Starting with the central parts of the country on Thursday night, it will rain nationwide on Friday and Saturday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Right, those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. As always, thank you for watching.
누나가 발레를 하다 보니까 자연스럽게 누나 발레 학원에 따라가서 누나가 하는 모습을 보니까 저도 하고 싶다고 생각이 조금 들어서 발레 음악에 맞춰서 아무 춤이나 추다 보니까 그냥 그 음악에 맞춰서 제가 몸을 움직이는 게 재밌다고 느껴졌었는지 발레를 계속 하고 있더라고요. 나이가 좀 어릴 때 제가 가진 장점이 무엇인지도 모르고 아예 제가 가진 단점도 모를 때 발레를 시작했다 보니까 제일 큰 문제가 이제 평발이었던 것 같아요. 평발이다 보니까 발레를 할 때 쥐가 조금 많이 나는 편이라 그거를 견뎌가면서 춤을 계속 춰야 했던 거 그게 가장 극복하기 힘들었던 것 같고요. 제가 다리가 다른 친구들보다 조금 두껍다고 해서 제 다리를 조금 싫어했었는데 근데 이제 로잔에 갔다 오고 나서 오히려 제 다리에서 나오는 파워풀한 힘이 좋았다고 해주시는 분들도 있다는 걸 느껴가지고 그 두 개가 가장 극복하기도 힘들었고 기억에 남는 것 같아요. 프릭스티 로잔이라는 콩쿨 자체가 학생들 사이에서는 가장 크고 의미 있는 콩쿨이다 보니 제가 그 로잔 영상을 보면서 자라왔기 때문에 그 무대에 서서 제가 춤을 췄다는 것 자체가 엄청 인상 깊었던 것 같아요. 제가 걸어왔던 길, 이게 맞는 방법일까? 근데 그런 의구심을 다 없앨 수 있게 제가 가는 길이 맞았다라는 거를 확인시켜줬던 것 같아요. 그래서 그런 감정이 들어서 조금 감격스러웠던 것 같아요. 한 배역에만 잘 할 수 있는 명수가 아니라 어떠한 배역을 받아도 다 넣어서 소화해낼 수 있는 그런 스펙트럼이 넓은 명수가 되고 싶습니다.
President Lee Jae-myung is making his diplomatic debut at the Group of Seven gathering over in Canada this week. We have more press perspective today.
Hope you had a pleasant weekend. It's Monday, June 16th here in Seoul, and you're watching Press Perspective. Now, today we touch upon the president's upcoming diplomatic engagement with his foreign counterparts since taking the top office. For more on this, I have Celia Ferretti with French daily Le Croix here in the studio. Celia, it's great to have you back.
Glad to be here.
I also have Chan Soram, a former reporter for Radio Free Asia. Soram, welcome back.
Glad to be back.
Right, Celia, we will begin with you. Let's start off then with a bit of information about the agenda of the Group of Seven summit over in Canada this week.
Sure. This year, the G7 summit is being held in Canada, in the beautiful region of Kananaskis in Alberta. I hope I didn't scorch the name. From June 15th to 17th, as host, Canada has laid out a carefully balanced agenda focused on the more urgent topics, urgent matters in the world, but also shaped around political sensitivities, especially from the US. At the top of the agenda, of course, is the escalating conflict in the Middle East, with the situation in Gaza, also now with between Israel and Iran. Canada and other G7 members are pushing for a de-escalation of the whole conflict and a united diplomatic response to that. Although it's clear this won't be easy, especially with President Trump in the middle and playing a quite ambiguous role. That brings also one of the biggest shifts this year. There will be no joint communique from the group. Canada will release separate statements to explain what the discussion is about. This is a strategic move to avoid public disagreement, especially from the US, because last time Trump participated in the G7 in Canada, he refused to endorse the communique, which created quite a whole diplomatic crisis, and even called the then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau weak and dishonest. So it was a whole mess and really bad image for the G7. And beyond diplomacy, also the economic front is really important. Still, with Trump and his tariff policy, G7 leaders are discussing and focusing on maybe finding an alternative, a compromise to a deal with the US in somehow to access critical materials, but also lower the tariff that the US imposed on the rest of the world. Of course, also Ukraine will be on the table. Volodymyr Zelensky is invited, as the South Korean president also is invited this year, to discuss maybe a peace treaty, maybe some progress with Russia. We'll see. That's still ongoing. It's a difficult topic. It won't be easy to achieve anything on that matter, but still it's important that the president is there to talk about this topic. As I mentioned, South Korea is invited, also with Brazil, on-site meeting on the border of the global G7. It's also, I think it's a good opportunity to test, to enlarge maybe the G7 to other countries and see a different point of view on global matters.
Right. Soram, as Celia mentioned, President Lee Jae-myung is flying to Canada today to partake in the extended session of the G7. Could you tell us a bit more about his agenda in Canada?
So, as you mentioned, President Lee Jae-myung is making his diplomatic debut at the G7 summit, and I think it's more than just his first overseas trip. It's his first appearance on the international stage since South Korea's political turbulence after the martial law and after impeachment. That alone makes this summit highly symbolic. Many see this trip as the restart of South Korea's top-level diplomacy after nearly 6 months of silence. Lee is stepping in to fill that leadership vacuum, and this G7 meeting serves as a launching point to reintroduce South Korea as a stable and proactive global player. The main focus of his agenda is expected to be economic diplomacy. Just days ago, he met with the leaders of South Korea's leading companies like Samsung, Hyundai, SK, and more, pledging to ease regulations and expand global trade. And at the G7, he'll be making the case for South Korea as key innovation partner, especially in AI, semiconductors, and green technology. But North Korea issue is also expected to come up with growing military ties between Pyongyang and Moscow. Lee is likely to raise concerns about regional security. He is expected to reaffirm South Korea's commitment to preventing any further provocation from North Korea, and also signaling that he is open to the dialogue. And he's also expected to hold bilateral meetings with leaders including US, Japan, and top EU officials, reinforcing alliances and expanding diplomatic channels.
Right, for sure. Celia, ahead of this gathering, China warned the G7 against manipulating issues related to China for its own agenda. Could you give us some context behind this particular warning and, of course, its implications?
Exactly. Just days before the G7, China issued a strong and very public warning to the group. A spokesperson from Chinese Foreign Ministry, Li Yingjian, accused the G7 of maintaining what he called a Cold War mentality. He said that the bloc needed to stop interfering in others' countries' internal affairs, stop undermining their development, and to stop manipulating issues related with China. So where is this coming from? Well, China has been under increased scrutiny from the G7, particularly when it comes to trade, to global influence, and its relationship with Russia. For example, in the last year G7 summit, the final communique mentioned China more than 20 times, criticized what it called China's economic policy, unfair business practices, and even warned about potential sanctions against Chinese banks that could help Russia to evade sanctions after the war in Ukraine. So all of that, in Beijing perspective, in Beijing point of view, it looks like a coordinated pressure against them. China sees the G7 as trying to limit their influence, to downscale their power, maybe their also political influence in the world. And this inclusion of countries like India and Brazil, countries that are part of the BRICS community that also China is part of, they feel it's maybe a way for the G7 to put the countries of the South in a fight, in competition for accessing the G7, which China sees very unfair to them. They feel the European powers or US are accessing too much influence there. Also, let's not forget that this year there's 5 new leaders, member of the G7, because of all of the election in last year. And that brings uncertainty on how will they take position on China. I think we'll see a lot of development during this session.
Right. Now, meanwhile, amid the tensions between China and the G7, quite a number of pundits here, Soram, are talking about how South Korea will need to navigate a delicate dance, if you will, between the US and China. What exactly have they been saying, and what can we expect based on what President Lee Jae-myung said during his campaign and after?
President Lee Jae-myung is entering a complicated diplomatic moment, with tensions between the US and China escalating, and Beijing already voicing strong objections to the G7, as earlier mentioned. Experts say South Korea is facing mounting pressure on both sides. However, Lee's approach is notably different from former President Yoon Suk-yeol. While Yoon leaned heavily towards Washington, President Lee emphasized the need for a more flexible foreign policy approach. He made clear that leaning too heavily on just one side, whether the US or China, could limit South Korea's options in the long run. So that idea now at the center of his diplomatic approach, I believe. Ahead of the summit, Lee once again made it clear that while the US-ROK alliance remains central to national security, he doesn't want to worsen relations with China and Russia. In his own words, he said, "We shouldn't turn our backs on others." His team emphasized that South Korea will coordinate with G7 countries on key issues like trade, tech, and global security, but also manage ties with China thoroughly. China, though, steady and case-by-case dialogue on matters like trade and regional peace. That means President Lee is expected to support G7 positions on topics like the war in Ukraine and fair economic practices, but in a carefully measured tone that avoid directly provoking Beijing.
Right. Celia, as you mentioned, this year's Group of 7 summit follows a preemptive strike by Israel against Iran, given the latter's nuclear weapons ambitions. What's the latest on that front?
It's very complicated to follow as it evolves every day, but the tension is escalating in the Middle East. As you mentioned, Israel launched a preemptive military strike against Iran in an operation called Rising Lion, targeting dozens of Iranian military sites, including part of Iran's nuclear program, alleged nuclear program. According to the Israeli military, they acted based on intelligence showing that Iran might be close to achieving or making significant progress on their nuclear weapon program. Israel called it a preemptive strike against Iran. In response, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, warned that Israel should expect a severe punishment. And over the weekend, Iran launched a wave of missiles targeting Israeli territory in what they called also Operation True Promise 3. Unfortunately, as in many conflicts, there has been a lot of casualties on both sides, counting maybe around 300, but the total count is difficult to establish. Now, the question these days, after this series of attacks back and forth between the two countries, what role will play the US in this conflict? Donald Trump has a sort of a mixed stance. It's quite ambiguous. At first, he posted on his platform Truth Social, which is his own social media, that the US has nothing to do with Israeli operation and warned Tehran to not drag America into the conflict. But later in an interview with ABC News, he acknowledged that the US might take part into the conflict we don't know exactly what terms or what role, but it is a possibility, as Donald Trump said. So I think now most of the experts are waiting to see what will be Washington's move on that. When asked about a deadline to restart nuclear talk with Iran, Trump said there was not one, but negotiations were ongoing. That was already the question in the months before that was still unresolved by Washington. There are some talks that are needed with Iran, but we don't know when and how long it's going to take. That's also in the balance. Maybe that will be a tool for negotiation to de-escalate the conflict. I hope we'll see something like that in the G7.
Right. And speaking about Mr. Trump, some claim that he appears to be adamantly opposed to Iran's nuclear ambitions, but appears to have accepted North Korea as a nuclear power. What might be the reason behind this discrepancy?
The Trump leadership took very different approaches to Iran and North Korea on nuclear issues. Even though both countries are seen as serious nuclear threats, he was very tough on Iran's nuclear program, imposing heavy sanctions and using maximum pressure strategy. But with North Korea, the approach was different. Heavy sanctions, yes, but he chose a more personal and diplomatic strategy with Pyongyang. At the core, the difference comes down to timing and strategy. North Korea already had nuclear weapons by the time Trump took office in 2017. It had conducted multiple nuclear tests and launched long-range missiles believed to be capable of reaching the U.S. mainland. So instead of pushing for immediate denuclearization, Trump focused on personal diplomacy, meeting Kim Jong-un, and managing the issue through dialogue rather than confrontation. By contrast, Iran does not currently have nuclear weapons, although its nuclear program is advancing. The Trump administration believes there is still time to stop Iran from crossing red line. That's why Trump pulled out of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal and reimposed sanctions under a maximum pressure strategy. In short, the different approaches reflect two very different realities. North Korea was already a nuclear-armed state, while Iran, in Washington's view, could still be stopped.
Right. And staying with the US and North Korea, just last week, Celia, we learned about a letter written by Mr. Trump for Kim Jong-un that the North Korean delegation at the UN refused to accept. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
That's right. Last week we learned that North Korea rejected a letter from former US President Donald Trump, which was meant to act as an invitation to reopen dialogue with Kim Jong-un. The letter was reportedly hand-delivered, or at least attempted to be multiple times by U.S. representative in the UN in New York, but each time North Korean diplomats refused to take it. Now, this isn't just about one letter, it's about where things stand today in the negotiation between the two countries. During his first term, Trump and Kim actually had a very unusual relationship that Donald Trump still brag about on almost a daily basis. Trump once said they fell in love after exchanging what he called beautiful letters. They even met 3 times during this famous meeting in 2018, including that very public moment when Donald Trump stepped in North Korean soil at the DMZ. But after the collapse of those talks, especially at the 2019 Hanoi summit, relations really froze between the two countries. Since then, tensions have climbed again, as we've seen in the news, especially with South Korea. And North Korea's nuclear ambition haven't stepped down. Actually, it's quite the opposite. In fact, North Korea has now enshrined its nuclear state status in its constitution. Trump's recent attempt to send a letter seems more like a move to reignite maybe a personal relationship that he might have built with Kim Jong-un. But at the same time, there's a new president now in South Korea that also is trying to maybe reopen the dialogue. Lee Jae-myung shut off the speakers at the border, and North Korea did the same, so maybe there's room for improvement. But that's going to be hard because North Korea doesn't want to give up its nuclear weapons. So if it's off the table, then what should we talk about? That's, I think, the big question now.
And that being said, Celia, what might encourage North Korea to return to the dialogue table?
Without a shift in U.S. position on North Korea, which says something that will not demand denuclearization of the North Korean regime, North Korea might simply just keep the door locked. Some analysts suggest that North Korea may be wary of repeating the same pattern that happened in the previous summits, especially the one in Hanoi, where things went down. I was talking to a U.S. diplomat recently, and they were not really optimistic of any possible new summit, or at least strong dialogue between the two countries. The situation has changed a lot since 2018 and 19. Kim Jong-un has a new ally, Vladimir Putin, in Russia, and he gets what he wants from him through sending troops on the front in Ukraine. And what might have encouraged Kim Jong-un before in the past to talk with Trump is maybe he wanted to test the waters with this new president that was very different from the rest. And maybe at the time he needed more to get something out of the US, maybe a recognition of his status as a nuclear power, or maybe something that he could make a deal with Trump. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Kim Jong-un doesn't seem to be interested to get something out of the US because he can get it through someone else. And I think that's going to take a lot of work in Washington to find something that could be interested for Kim Jong-un to talk to.
Right. Soram, we actually have a few minutes left, and that being said, I'd like to touch upon a rather much talked about event that took place over in Washington, D.C. this past weekend. There was a military parade there that had been the cause of much controversy even before it actually took place. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
I mean, it's my first time seeing a military parade in D.C. I was in D.C. a couple of years, and I was not expecting I would witness D.C. hosting a military parade. I believe this was actually the first major military parade in Washington since 1991, over 30 years. As you mentioned, the parade brought controversy even before it began. President Trump hosted the event to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army, and it happened to fall on his birthday, which brought more criticism. It featured over 6,000 troops, more than 100 tanks, flyovers, and more. For many Americans, it felt unexpected and quickly drew criticism. Some called it a political move. Critics pointed out that this kind of displays are more often in countries like Russia and North Korea, where military parades are used to boost regime's image and its military power. On top of that, the event raised concerns over cost. The Pentagon estimated the price tag up to $45 million. And according to polls by NBC and ABC News, 60% of Americans opposed using taxpayers' money for military parade. There was also unease over the timing. Just days before the Trump leadership sent National Guard troops and Marines to LA to respond to protests over immigration crackdowns. That decision paired with this military parade left many Americans worried that the military was being used for political purpose.
Right, and against this backdrop, Celia, American magazine The Atlantic, it actually applauded a ceremony, a celebration of what it called freedom over in Europe. Could you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, while in US it was busy with rolling tanks through Washington, Europe held a very different kind of celebration. It marked the 40th anniversary of the Schengen Treaty, a key moment in European history and European Union history. Now, Schengen is in real life just a small riverside town in the Netherlands, but it's more symbolic. It's there that was signed 40 years ago in 1985, the Treaty of Schengen by 5 countries, France, West Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg and the Netherlands, and they signed an agreement that basically said no more passport, no more border control, and let people just roam free across Europe. And it was a real milestone for European integration. Since then, that agreement expanded to over to 29 countries, covering more than 450 million people. And today, Schengen for Europeans is not just a convenience, it's really a symbol of what it is to be European, to travel freely, to go work in another country, to study abroad without thinking too much about visa or where to stay. You can just travel freely, and also that's also really attractive for people outside of Europe. They want to also access this free zone that is really gives a lot of opportunity for job and create your life here. Of course, Schengen is not perfect. There's some critics to be made, and the countries can restore their borders if they want to. In case, for example, during the COVID crisis, they could block the border to limit the spread of the virus. But despite all that, Schengen has become really this sort of heaven and symbolize freedom that I think is good to remember. Positive news can feel good sometimes, especially in this time of uncertainty. And I think Schengen Treaty is here to remind that.
Right, for sure, Celia. And on that positive note, we will end today's talks. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Suram, thank you very much for your insight.
Thank you.
Right, well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching, and do be sure to join us again, same time tomorrow.
제주특별자치도가 6차 4.3 희생자 보상금 신청을 2025년 1월 2일부터